The desert was quiet that night, so quiet it felt like the world itself had held its breath. I remember the way the fog crept along the sand dunes, curling like smoke from a fire long gone. Above me, the stars shimmered faintly, pale and distant, as if they were watching and waiting. The wind hummed softly through jagged rocks, carrying a static that prickled along my skin. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should, and the faint flicker of lights on the horizon made my heart skip. I thought I was alone, but then I heard it. A slow, rhythmic pulsing, almost like a heartbeat, hovering just beyond the dunes. I should have turned back. I know that now, but I didn't. My curiosity drew me forward, and I swear I saw shapes moving against the pale light. Shapes that didn't belong to this world. That's when I saw it. The desert was empty. Twilight stretched across the dunes, soft and fading. The sand felt cooler than I expected, brushing against my ankles with every step. A faint hum drifted through the air. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It vibrated beneath my feet, low, steady, like something beneath the surface, restless, alive. I paused. The horizon blurred in the fog, a pale wash of gray and violet. Light flickered far off, soft, irregular. I told myself it was a mirage, but my chest tightened. The hum grew louder. It was almost mechanical. Shadows shifted between the dunes, slowly, deliberately. I couldn't tell if they were moving with me or if I had just blinked wrong. A dry, sandy rustle whispered under my boots. The air tasted faintly metallic. I kept walking. The hum pulsed like a heartbeat now, steady, insistent. It pressed against my temples, filled my ears. The fog thickened. Edges of dunes became soft, smudged shapes. I could see lights again, closer this time. Golden, flickering, unsteady. They didn't belong. I crouched for a moment, breathing the damp, warm air. The vibration trembled through the soles of my shoes. It wasn't around me, it was under me. A shadow rose ahead. Tall, angular, unnatural. It emerged slowly from the sand. I froze. Its surface glimmered with a faint metallic sheen. The hum surged. It sounded alive, like it could think. Or wait. I couldn't tell which. The desert smelled of dust and iron. Each breath felt heavy, thick. I wanted to step back, but my legs felt numb. The figure didn't move. Yet it didn't need to. The fog pressed in closer. I couldn't see the horizon anymore. Only the pale glimmer of that shape, anchored in the dunes. The light from its edges flickered like breathing. I imagined it might reach for me, or speak, or disappear, but it stayed, silent, patient, watching. I crouched lower, letting the sand sink into my palms. My fingertips tingled with cold. The hum softened a little, as if listening to me, or pretending to. Time folded. Every step I took felt like wading through water. I could smell the warm metal under the sand, and hear the faint, endless heartbeat of the desert itself. The shape shimmered. It rose higher, then sank slightly into the dune. Unnatural, impossible, and yet it was there. I whispered to the wind, to the fog, to the empty desert. No answer came. Only the hum, faintly, patiently, waiting for me to decide what to do. I didn't move. I couldn't. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized I might never be alone again. The mesa rose from the desert like a pale sentinel. Twilight lingered, stretching long shadows across the rocky cliffs. The air smelled of dry stone and distant rain. From the distance, the plateau glowed softly. A pale light, almost silver, spilling across the edges of jagged rock. I stopped and watched, breath catching. The wind carried whispers, almost like words. I tilted my head, listening. But they dissolved before I could understand them. Silhouettes darted along the cliffs. Thin, quick movements. Too fast, too deliberate to be animals. They vanished behind jagged rocks, leaving only stillness and the faint glow. I felt a chill in my hands. The wind rustled over the stones. Each whisper pressed against my ears. I wondered if the mesa itself was speaking, or something hidden on it. Step by step, I climbed closer. The rocks bit at my palms and knees. The sand crunched beneath my boots. The glow grew stronger. It pulsed with my heartbeat, faint, gentle, insistent. I paused at the edge. The light licked my skin like a soft, cold breath. Shadows deepened behind me. The whispers stilled. I could hear nothing but my own pulse. One silhouette lingered longer than the others. Thin and tall, bending with the contours of the cliff. It tilted its head as if studying me, then vanished. The wind shifted. Carried a scent of dry stone and faint ozone. The glow seemed to swell. Every pulse matched my heartbeat. Closer now. It beckoned silently. I stepped forward, into the pale light. And everything stopped. No wind, no whispers. No pulse, just stillness. The mesa seemed to hold its breath. I held mine too. The shadows flattened against the rocks. The silhouettes were gone. Only the light remained. I touched the stone. Cold, smooth, impossibly silent. My own breath sounded loud in the emptiness. Time seemed to fold. The mesa didn't feel alive or dead. It just waited for me. I knelt, letting my hands sink into the rough, cold surface. The glow trembled faintly beneath my palms. Soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat I could almost hear. I breathed slowly, tasted dust and stone and a hint of something else, sharp and metallic. Every sense felt heightened. And still, nothing moved. I wanted to speak. A word, a question. But the silence pressed back. I swallowed it. Let the quiet fold around me. The pale light shifted, just enough to make the shadows stretch. I realized I was alone, yet not alone. Some presence lingered in the folds of the cliffs. I took a step back. The glow didn't fade. It stayed, patient, waiting. And in that stillness, I felt it. The mesa had watched me arrive. It would watch me leave. Or maybe it never expected me to leave at all. I let the wind creep around me again, soft, almost caring. The whispers returned, gentle and unreadable, and I moved slowly down the rocks, heart still pulsing with the rhythm of the pale light, not daring to breathe too loudly. The desert night stretched endlessly. Cool air drifted over the dunes, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant stone. Stars hung high, sharp, almost too bright. But they weren't ordinary. They blinked, paused, and shifted as if they were aware of me. Patterns formed, brief, deliberate, then gone. I squinted, certain I imagined it. But instinct told me otherwise. The wind was still. The only movement was the soft rustle of sand under my boots, and then a faint static prickled through the air. It crackled gently, almost like a whisper. I pressed my palms to my ears. It didn't stop. Above, a shape hovered. Motionless, immense, reflecting the pale moonlight. I couldn't tell how far away it was, or how high. It was heavy, pressing down on the desert even from the sky. I wanted to run. Every nerve screamed to move, to vanish into the dunes. But my feet felt rooted, eyes locked on that reflection. Frozen. The stars above seemed to lean closer, blinking in unison. I could feel their gaze brushing my skin, cold, almost static-like. The air smelled of ozone, faint and sharp. A metallic tang, undercut by dry sand. The object didn't move, yet it felt alive. Every instinct in me screamed presence, like the desert itself had turned into something that watched and waited. I breathed slowly. The hum of static ran along my arms. It tickled my fingertips. The sand beneath me shifted slightly with my weight. Even that felt deliberate. I imagined shapes flickering in the darkness, thin, shadowy forms darting between dunes. Always at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I tried to focus. The moonlight bounced off the hovering object, pale and cold. I could see the desert stretched in waves of silver and shadow, and yet all stillness, no wind to carry sound, no rustling. Only the faint, constant crackle that filled the silence. I knelt, letting my hands brush the cool sand. It smelled faintly of metal now, bitter and sharp. The static hummed through my palms, my wrists. I could almost hear a heartbeat beneath it. Not mine. Something else I wanted to speak. Whisper a word. Ask a question. But my voice was gone. Lost in the vast, patient watching of the night. The stars blinked again, intentional, certain. And I realized they weren't just above. They were aware. Tracing me, marking the dunes, folding the desert into their rhythm. The hovering object pulsed slightly. Like it knew I noticed. Like it waited for me to see everything at once. I could feel the weight of it pressing down. Every breath felt louder. Every heartbeat echoed in my chest. I rose slowly, feet sinking slightly into the cold, rough sand. The static crackled faintly with each step. The sky followed. Every star watching, blinking, pulsing with some unspoken intent. I tried to move backward. The dunes stretched endlessly behind me. Soft footsteps whispered across the sand, though I was alone. Every instinct told me I should run, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. Time thinned. The hovering shape, the blinking stars, the silent desert, they folded together. I realized I was part of it now, observed, not trapped, but not free either. The static softened. The desert breathed. And somewhere in the night, I felt that weight of stars, of hovering presence, of endless watching, pressed gently, endlessly, until I couldn't remember the world without it. I stayed there, still, gazing upward, waiting, and the sky waited with me. The desert stretched endlessly under the dim glow of dawn. Cold air brushed my face. The sand smelled faintly of damp earth and dry stone. I had wandered for hours. The dunes rolled like pale waves, silent, patient. And then I saw them, footprints, large, too precise to be human. Deep impressions pressed into the soft sand. They led forward, straight and deliberate. I crouched. Fingers brushed the edges of the prints. The sand was cold, granular under my skin. Each depression felt intentional, measured. The wind shifted. A cold whisper trailed across my ears, almost like a voice. I tilted my head. It vanished. Step by step, I followed the trail. My own boots muffled against the sand. Every footprint ahead glimmered faintly in the pale light. The air smelled sharper now, metallic, like rust or iron. Shadows stretched between the dunes. Soft rustling whispered behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only the endless desert, empty, watching. The prints continued, straight, perfect, too precise. I began to feel the pulse of the desert through my boots. Something beneath the sand trembled faintly, and then they stopped. The footprints ended suddenly. The sand ahead was untouched, pristine, not a mark. I knelt again, ran my fingers over the cold grains. No sign of disturbance. No shadow, no whisper, just silence. The wind picked up. It carried that faint, sharp whisper again. I couldn't tell if it was words or just the desert teasing my mind. I pressed my hands over my ears. The whisper lingered anyway. I stepped carefully forward. Sand gave slightly beneath my boots. Nothing moved. Nothing waited. Yet my pulse raced. I imagined shapes flickering at the edge of vision. Tall, thin shadows moving between dunes. Always gone when I blinked. And the footprints, they felt alive, tracing a path that led nowhere or to something I couldn't see. The light shifted. Pale sun crept over the ridges. Each footprint cast a long, delicate shadow. I counted them. Each one. Perfect. I knelt again. Fingers brushed the first print in the line. Cold, hard, untouched by time. And the whisper returned. Gentle, insistent, fading into the rustle of sand. I tried to follow the prints with my eyes, step by step, and then they were gone. Nothing but undisturbed dunes. The desert stretched empty before me. I breathed slowly, tasted dust and faint metal. Every sense heightened, and yet, the footprints lingered in my mind. I imagined them moving, slow, deliberate, eternal. Each one pressing into the desert like a message I couldn't read. And the silence between them, heavier than the night itself. I stayed there. Watching the sand, the dunes, the pale light, the wind whispered faintly across my face. I felt a presence, patient and patient, waiting somewhere just beyond the empty desert. And then I walked away. Each step careful, soft, leaving the footprints behind. Or perhaps they never were behind me at all. The canyon walls rose like silent sentinels. Evening shadows stretched long and thin across the jagged stone. The air smelled of dust, hot rock, and something faintly metallic. I held the radio in my hands. It was quiet at first. The static hummed faintly under my fingertips. Then a voice cracked through. Distorted. Close. Impossible. I couldn't understand the words. Only fragments. Breathless, warped syllables that pressed against my ears. The canyon seemed to lean in. Shadows bent in impossible angles. Every crevice deepened unnaturally as if the rock itself had lungs, I whispered into the radio. Nothing came back. My own voice swallowed by the static. Only the distorted murmurs returned, looping, patient, waiting. A faint glow flickered at the canyon's edge. Soft, pulsing with the rhythm of the radio signal. It reflected off the stone walls, stretching long shadows behind me. The light shimmered pale, almost alive. The static pulsed in tandem. A hum beneath the crackle. It ran along my arms, brushing skin and bone alike. My heart synced with it, though I wanted nothing to do with the rhythm. The wind whispered through narrow gaps. It carried a faint tang of metal and ozone. I stepped closer to the glow. Every stone beneath my boots felt brittle, fragile. The voices repeated, closer now. Almost right next to me. I couldn't see anyone. Couldn't tell if they were coming from the canyon floor. Or from inside my own skull. I raised the radio again. The static swallowed my question. A cough of sound, garbled and faint, answered instead. A rhythm, a pattern. Shadows twisted along the walls. Shapes moved against gravity, leaned out, then back. Stretching, bending. Something about them wrong. I breathed slowly, letting the cold canyon air fill my lungs. The radio vibrated faintly under my hand. Every pulse of light synchronized with the static, each crackle sharp in my ears. I took another step toward the glow. The canyon seemed to grow taller, folding in around me. Shadows pressed closer. The voice repeated, patient, deliberate. The glow pulsed brighter. I could feel the warmth faintly, though the air was cold. It reflected off the canyon walls, painting the dust with pale, trembling light. I whispered again. The static answered, sharper now. I couldn't tell if it was outside me or inside time-folded. Every sound, every shadow, every pulse of light, synchronized in a rhythm that I could not escape. The radio hummed, low and constant. The canyon waited. The light pulsed. The shadows leaned closer. I let the static fill my mind. Fingers gripping the radio, the dust slipping softly between them. The glow flickered once more, and then silence. The canyon held its breath. The shadows paused. The light dimmed to a pale wash over stone. Only the faint scent of metal and dust remained. I took a step back. Soft footsteps pressed into the sand, though I was alone. The radio went quiet. The canyon was still, but the memory of the pulse stayed. The hum beneath the static, the shape of the shadows, and the light. Patient, waiting at the edge, as though it had known I would come. The desert night was colder than I expected. Stars hung faint and pale overhead. The wind whispered through the dunes, soft and patient. A campfire burned ahead, small, fragile, orange against the gray sand. Its warmth brushed my fingers. The scent of smoke lingered, sharp and familiar. I stepped closer. The fire seemed alive, breathing with the desert, flickering softly, and then it vanished. No crackle, no spark, just cold air where the warmth had been. The sand held its chill like water frozen in place. Strange footprints circled the spot, too precise, too deliberate to be human. They traced the fire in a loop, fading into the dunes. The sand shifted slightly under my fingers, smooth, untouched, yet the prints had been there. I knelt, tasting dust on my lips. The wind carried a cold whisper. It threaded through my hair, brushing the back of my neck. I could feel the desert inhaling around me, slowly, deliberately. A fleeting silhouette appeared at the edge of the firelight. Thin, shadowed, uncertain. It lingered just long enough for my heart to jump. Then, gone. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron mixed with ash. Every breath felt heavy. The desert pressed in closer, yet nothing moved. Only the sand shifted softly beneath my hands. I followed the footprints in the dust. Each step made a quiet crunch. They looped around, returning to the empty circle where the fire had burned. Nothing awaited me there, only silence. The desert seemed alive. Its inhale and exhale matched my own pulse. The emptiness stretched endlessly. The stars above flickered, pale and distant. I knelt again, fingers brushing the cold grains of sand. The circle of footprints whispered in memory. A shadow stretched across the dunes. But it belonged to nothing I could see. The cold pressed against my cheeks. Every sound, every breath felt magnified. The desert inhaled again, and I felt it. Not a presence exactly, but a patient watchfulness. The silhouette returned, fleeting. Just at the edge. A pause, a flicker, then gone. The sand held no memory of it, and yet my chest remembered its shape. I stayed there, still, letting the desert's rhythm fold around me. The wind whispered faintly through the dunes. The stars trembled above, and I realized the campfire had never been mine. The footprints were never meant to guide me. The silhouette was never meant to stay. I rose slowly. The cold brushed my hands, my face, my hair. Each step sank softly into the sand. The desert exhaled behind me. I walked on, leaving the vanishing fire, the looping footprints, and the fleeting shadow to their patient waiting. The desert lay still beneath a darkening sky. Twilight had faded to a deep, muted blue. The sand smelled faintly of stone and dry earth, cool under my fingertips. Shadows moved, not with the sun, not with the dunes. They stretched, twisted, hovered above the sand like smoke caught in a pause. I froze. Every instinct told me they should not move alone. A soft hum vibrated through the sand. I pressed my palm against it. The vibration ran along my wrist, into my arm, warm and strange. It was patient, insistent, alive. Shapes appeared in the distance. Thin, leaning, impossible. They darted across the dunes but vanished when I blinked, like smoke drawn back into some hidden place. The air felt thicker here. Dust rose slowly beneath my boots, only to fall again without sound. I could taste it faintly. Dry, metallic, sharp. The shadows moved closer. I wanted to step back. I couldn't. The humming deepened. Not loud, but resonant. Every grain of sand seemed to tremble under it. Every shadow bent differently than the one beside it. Nothing obeyed gravity. Nothing obeyed reason. I whispered into the silence. The desert absorbed it. No echo returned. Only the soft vibration beneath my feet and the slow pulse of hovering dark shapes. A shadow flickered near me. Long, thin, tilting in a way that made my skin prickle. It leaned against nothing. Paused. Then stretched farther than it should. The shapes in the distance returned. Now closer. Hovering just above the ridges. I could smell faint ozone in the air, sharp against the dry sand. My fingers brushed the grains at my feet, trembling. I tried to focus on one shadow. It drifted, folding over itself, then flattened, then rose again. Impossible angles, impossible shapes. The hum pulsed like a heartbeat. Slow, steady. It pressed against the soles of my boots, through my legs, into my chest. Time seemed to bend. The hovering shadows repeated movements I could not track, like they were alive and alive alone. I imagined them laughing softly or whispering my name in a language I could not hear. The wind carried faint scents, dust, metal, something sweet and unplaceable. I breathed slowly, tasting each one, trying to anchor myself in the desert that now felt uncertain. The hum softened slightly. The shapes paused. Everything waited. I stepped forward. The sand gave faintly beneath my boots, cool and granular. The shadows lifted higher, hovering with more intent. Each movement deliberate, not random. I stopped again, held my breath, and realized I was not alone. Yet there was no one to see. No one to speak to. Only hovering dark shapes, bending the desert around them. The hum faded to a low vibration. The desert inhaled around me, slowly, deliberately, and I stayed, still, letting the soft tension press against my skin. The hovering shadows leaning, twisting, watching, until the night swallowed all certainty, and the shapes vanished. Or maybe I had. The desert was empty. Twilight lingered, pale and thin, across the dunes. The air smelled faintly of dry stone and dust, cool against my cheeks. I felt it first as a weight. Not heavy exactly, but patient, watching. No sound came from it. No movement. Just a presence at the edge of perception. It lingered there, patient, waiting. Dust swirled around my boots. Not randomly, shaping, shifting, forming vague humanoid outlines. I blinked. The shapes stretched away, like reflections in a warped mirror. I stepped closer. The wind carried a faint metallic tang. The desert seemed colder. The shapes receded, elongating, impossible. Closer and yet always distant. The sand beneath my fingers felt dry, granular, almost alive. The shapes hovered at the edge of vision, folding in on themselves like smoke caught in slow motion. Every instinct told me to turn back, but my feet pressed forward. I breathed slowly. The air felt heavier. Every inhalation tasted faintly of iron. The desert held its silence tightly around me. Not empty, not still, but full of patient watching. The humanoid forms shimmered, their edges hazy, flickering like pale light through fog. I could not tell if they were moving toward me or if I was falling deeper into their perception. Shadows pressed against the dunes. Every grain of sand seemed heightened, magnified. Soft rustling brushed my ankles, but when I looked, nothing moved. Only the shapes, lingering, patient, watching. I knelt, letting my palms sink into the cold sand. The shapes mirrored me, shifting with every tilt of my head. They were close, yet distant, like I was looking through glass. The desert's breath brushed my face. Cold, soft, insistent, the shapes remained. I moved forward again. The distance between us stretched impossibly. Time folded in on itself. The shapes shimmered at the edge, a slow, rhythmic motion that made my chest tighten. The air tasted dry, metallic, sharp. The presence did not rush. It waited, I whispered, though I knew it would not answer. The dust swirled brighter with each word, reflecting me in fragments, mirroring my fear, my hesitation, my isolation. I stood again, slowly, carefully. Each step pressed into soft, cold sand. The shapes wavered, flickering at the edges of my vision. Always there, always watching. The desert exhaled, and I realized I was not alone. Not in form, but in attention. Somewhere in that air, in that dust, something waited, patient, distant, impossible. I stepped backward. Soft footprints pressed into the sand. The shapes lingered, mirroring me in subtle, impossible ways. And then the wind shifted. The desert seemed to inhale once more, pulling the shapes farther, stretching the distance until I was alone again. But the weight remained. The patient gaze lingering at the edge of perception. And I knew as I walked into the emptiness, it would follow. The desert night stretched wide and empty. Cold air bit at my face. The dunes smelled faintly of stone and dry earth. Lights appeared above the ridge, soft, pulsing, irregular. They didn't belong to the stars or the moon. They moved with a rhythm that felt deliberate. I started climbing. The wind stung my cheeks, carried the scent of dust and distant metal. My boots sank into the loose sand. Each step closer made the lights pulse stronger, almost as if they were alive. Shadows stretched along the ridges. The desert was silent, but I felt it pressing in. Soft, patient, watching. The lights shifted, flickered. I blinked. Shapes danced briefly at the edges, then disappeared into the dark. I moved slowly, deliberately, hands brushing against rough stone. The air tasted dry and metallic. The wind hummed faintly through the ridges, mixing with the pulse of the lights. Closer now. The rhythm matched my heartbeat. Step by step, I climbed higher. The cold seeped into my fingers, my neck. I reached the peak. The lights vanished. No flicker, no glow. Only fog stretched out before me. Thick, pale, endless. The desert exhaled around me. Every ridge, every dune swallowed in white. I could hear nothing but the wind and the soft rustling of my own breath. I knelt, letting my fingers sink into the cold sand. The pulse was gone, yet I could feel its memory, trembling beneath my skin. The fog shifted faintly. Shapes hinted at movement, always at the edge of sight. Always just out of reach, I rose slowly. The air tasted sharper now, metallic and dry. The desert seemed larger, empty, patient, unbroken. The ridge held only silence. No lights, no shapes, just fog stretching endlessly. I could feel it pressing against me, and I realized the lights were not gone. They had only moved beyond my perception, waiting for something I could not yet see. I stepped back slowly, boots sinking into soft, cold sand. The wind carried faint whispers. I followed them, careful, leaving the ridge, but not its memory. The desert stretched pale beneath a faint moon. Cool air brushed my skin. The sand smelled dry, sharp, metallic in the distance. Then it appeared, a metallic shape resting on the dunes. Silent. No wind, no sound, nothing disturbed around it. Only its soft glow reflecting across the sand. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the fine grains. The light shimmered off the edges, cold and deliberate. The air tasted faintly of ozone, crisp against my tongue. The surface was etched. Symbols, geometric, precise. They ran in patterns I couldn't understand. Lines that twisted and intersected, shadows forming within the grooves. I knelt, fingers brushing the cool metal. It hummed faintly beneath my touch. A vibration ran through the sand, through my boots, up my legs. The desert seemed to exhale. Slow, patient, as if it had been waiting. The light from the object pulsed slightly, in rhythm with the vibration beneath my feet. I held my breath. The wind whispered faintly around the dunes. Every grain of sand shifted slightly, even though no one had moved. I traced the symbols with my fingertips. The texture was cold, smooth, alien. The faint hum grew stronger, a rhythm deep in my chest, in my bones. Shadows stretched along the dunes. The desert pressed inward. Every instinct told me to step back, but my feet stayed, rooted in the sand, staring. The vibration increased, a pulse beneath the sand. It resonated with the symbols, the shape, as if the desert itself had become an instrument. And then, the object lifted. Slowly, almost gently. No sound, no disturbance, only soft light reflecting across the dunes and the air tingling faintly with static. I stepped backward, heart hammering. Sand slipped beneath my boots. The glow lingered on my hands, on the dunes, on the faint symbols etched deep in the metal. The desert exhaled once more. The object drifted upward, patient, deliberate. The vibration faded. The moonlight fell cold and empty again. I stayed where I was, fingers brushing the grains of sand. The soft light vanished. But the memory remained, etched in the desert, in the chill that pressed against my skin, in the vibration that lingered beneath my feet. Alone, I realized. I had witnessed something that the desert had carried silently, and now it was gone, but not forgotten. The desert lay quiet beneath a heavy, fading sky. Cold air brushed my face. Sand smelled faintly metallic and dry. The radio hummed softly in my hands. A faint signal broke through the static, repeating, relentless. I couldn't understand the words, yet they felt familiar. Shadows flickered across the dunes. Soft, elongated, moving against the wind. I froze. Every instinct told me they shouldn't move alone. I turned the dial slowly. The signal persisted, repeating, patient. A rhythm I could feel beneath my fingertips, trembling faintly, almost alive. The shadows crept closer, not with the wind, not with any sound. They pressed against the dunes like smoke, stretching, flickering, aware. I whispered into the empty air. No reply, only the faint repetition of the signal, carrying its indecipherable words through the cold night. I tried to locate the source. Every step forward, every movement led only to emptiness. The shadows shifted in tandem, always near, yet always just out of reach. The air tasted faintly metallic. A pulse ran through the sand beneath my boots. The signal hummed, low and patient, vibrating through the dunes, pressing against my chest, soft and insistent. I knelt, letting my fingers sink into the cold grains. The shadows leaned, flickered, always at the edge of vision. I felt their presence without seeing form, a gaze that stretched across distance and silence. The radio repeated again. Words I could not place, yet felt like memory. Every breath made the desert louder. Every heartbeat matched the faint pulse of the signal. I stepped forward carefully. Sand slipped beneath my boots. The shadows twisted, mirroring my movements, sliding over the dunes like water, always just beyond reach. I paused. The wind whispered faintly, carrying dust and iron. The signal hummed through my chest. The shadows stopped. The desert held its breath. I knelt again. The signal persisted, patient, persistent, indecipherable. The shadows lingered. Always close, always just beyond perception, I realized I could not chase it. The source could not be found. The words would never make sense, yet their presence remained, etched in the hum, in the vibration beneath my hands, in the soft rustle of sand underfoot. I rose slowly. The shadows shifted with me, stretching across the dunes in impossible angles. The faint signal continued its endless loop. Patient, distant, familiar. I walked into the empty desert. Soft footprints pressed into the sand. The signal hummed behind me. The shadows lingered at the edge of sight. And I realized some things wait beyond perception. Some words are meant only to be felt. The desert stretched silent beneath a pale, fading sky. Air smelled dry, sharp, carrying the faint scent of stone and dust. The dunes were calm, then the wind shifted, soft at first, a ripple across the sand. And suddenly it rose. The sandstorm came, swallowing the horizon. Whirling grains scratched my skin. The air burned, thick with dust. I pulled my arms close, tasting grit on my lips. Through the wind, faint whispers reached me, soft, elusive, like breath brushing past the dunes. I could not tell words from wind, only their intent. Patient, watching, shapes moved within the fog, shifting, folding, impossible. They danced against the storm, moving in patterns I could not understand. Not like creatures, not like humans. Something else. The sand stung my cheeks. I pressed my hands against my face, felt it press into my fingers, cold beneath the heat of friction. The whispers followed me, threading through the storm, soft and persistent. I stepped carefully. Each footfall pressed into grains that shifted and slid. The shapes mirrored me, moving in impossible synchrony, always at the edge of perception. The storm howled, relentless. My ears ached with the wind's rhythm, yet the whispers persisted, lingering beneath the roar, patient and distant. I reached a small ridge. Sand swirled higher, almost vertical. Shapes flickered through the fog, stretching shadows over dunes that had been empty minutes before. I knelt, letting the grains sift through my fingers. Cold and sharp beneath my palms. The desert pressed in closer. Every inhale tasted dry, metallic, strange. Every exhale stirred more sand, more whispers. The storm's pulse slowed. The wind receded. The shapes folded back into the dunes, vanishing like smoke. The desert lay empty again, silent, cold, yet the whispers remained. Faint, distant, etched into memory. I could feel them in the rustle of the sand beneath my boots, in the soft movement of air along my neck, in the shadowed shapes that lingered just out of sight. I rose slowly. Fingers brushed the desert dust. The horizon was pale, empty, patient. The storm had passed, but the weight lingered. Alone, I stepped forward. Soft footsteps pressed into the sand. The wind had died. The dunes held only the memory of movement, and the whispers. Always the whispers, patient, distant, impossible to follow, and impossible to forget. The desert lay quiet beneath a cold, pale sky. Sand smelled dry and sharp, metallic beneath my fingers. The air was still, yet charged with something unseen. Then I saw it, a fissure in the desert floor. Light glowed from within, pulsing slowly, eerily. The edges shimmered with heat, yet the air brushing my skin was freezing. I stepped closer. Boots pressed softly into the sand. The light seemed to respond, dimming slightly as I approached. Shadows along the dunes stretched toward it, long, thin, patient. A faint hum vibrated through the ground. I pressed a palm against the sand. It pulsed beneath my hand, slow, deliberate, almost alive. The glow seemed to breathe, a rhythm I could not follow. The heat radiated faintly, but the cold pressed inward, biting at my cheeks, my neck. I leaned closer, drawn, compelled. Dust swirled lightly in the air. Faint scents of ozone and dry stone filled my nostrils. The shadows shifted, folding toward the rift. Stretching over dunes, folding across themselves in impossible angles, I knelt at the edge. Fingers hovered above the glowing fissure. The light dimmed instantly. A whisper of static pulsed beneath the sand. The hum lingered, faint, patient, insistent. I exhaled slowly. The desert pressed closer. Every grain of sand seemed heightened, every shadow elongated. The glow pulsed softly once more, then faded again as I leaned in. I traced the fissure with a fingertip. Cold sand pressed beneath, the heat of the rift brushing faintly against my wrist. The glow pulsed again, slower this time, as if aware of my touch. The desert held its silence. I could hear nothing but the faint hum beneath the sand. the shifting of dust over the dunes, the stretching shadows that lingered around the rift. I rose slowly. The light dimmed again, retreating into the fissure. The shadows receded slightly, curling back into the contours of the dunes. I stepped back. The desert felt colder now, more vast, more empty. The rift pulsed faintly, distant, patient, waiting. I breathed the dry air deeply. Sand sifted through my fingers. The glow had faded almost entirely, but the memory lingered. The pulse, the heat, the impossible stretch of shadows. Alone, I realized. The rift had not revealed itself. It had only observed, and I had stepped too close to something that belonged only to the desert. The dunes were swallowed by fog, pale and thick, curling around every ridge. The air smelled of damp sand, cold and sharp. I moved slowly, boots sinking into softened grains. Every step pressed against unseen shapes beneath the surface. Eyes appeared first, faint, glimmering, reflected in the haze, watching, silent, patient. I couldn't tell how many, or how close. The wind was still, only the faint rustle of shifting sand beneath my hands. Shapes lurked in the fog, stretching, folding, just beyond reach. They vanished if I leaned closer. A cold chill brushed my neck. The fog pressed against my face, moist and heavy. The eyes followed. I could feel them, not see them, weightless and patient. I paused. The dunes were empty yet full of presence. Every breath tasted of wet sand and iron. Every heartbeat echoed in the quiet. The fog thickened. Shadows moved in impossible ways, curves and angles that the dunes shouldn't allow. I traced them with my eyes, only to have them dissolve into mist. I knelt, fingers pressed into the damp grains, cold and yielding beneath my palms. The eyes lingered at the edges of perception, always aware, always just beyond understanding. I stood slowly. The fog shifted, a faint rustle, like whispered movement over distant sand. I could not locate its source. The shapes remained vague, folding back into themselves when approached. I inhaled slowly. The smell of wet stone, of sand pressing underfoot. The eyes glimmered faintly, then vanished with a soft shift of the fog. Alone, I moved forward. Soft footsteps pressed into damp sand. The fog wrapped around me, patient, pressing. The eyes had not left. They lingered in memory, in every shadow, in every rustle of the dunes. I stopped. The desert was silent, empty, cold, and yet I could still feel them, always watching, always just out of reach. The desert lay pale beneath a quiet sky. Cool air brushed my skin. The sand smelled faintly metallic, dry, and shifting beneath my boots. Then it returned, the hum. Soft at first, constant, then louder, closer, vibrating through the sand. I could feel it beneath my feet, through my chest and my bones. Shadows flickered around the dunes. Thin, elongated, shifting against the pale light. I blinked and they dissolved, folding back into the sand. The air tasted faintly of ozone. I stepped forward slowly. Every footfall pressed grains that whispered beneath my toes. The hum persisted. It pressed closer, patient, insistent. A figure appeared, impossible in height, thin, stretching toward the sky. Its edges blurred, faint, wavering. I reached toward it. The pale light touched it, and it vanished, fading as if it had never been. Yet the hum remained, echoing, resonating, pulling at the edges of my awareness. I knelt, letting fingers sink into the sand, cold beneath the hum, sharp against my palms. The desert pressed in closer. Every grain of sand seemed alive with vibration, every shadow a movement that was not my own. I rose slowly. The figure returned, faint, distant, stretching impossibly across the dunes, flickering with every breath of wind, every pulse of the humming sand. The desert exhaled softly. I felt alone, yet observed, pulled forward by the resonance beneath my feet. I stepped forward carefully. The hum wrapped around me, warm and cold at once, threading through the night air, through the shifting shadows. The figure leaned slightly, stretching toward the hum, then dissolved again, leaving only faint impressions in the sand and the lingering vibration of its presence. I exhaled slowly. The desert was silent except for the hum, Constant, insistent, patient. The figure was gone. Yet its memory lingered in every shadow, every grain of sand underfoot, every pulse of vibration in the air. Alone, I moved forward. Soft footsteps pressed into the desert floor. The pale light stretched across the dunes. The hum continued. And I realized some presences are not meant to be understood, only felt. The desert stretched endless beneath a pale sky. Sand shifted softly under my boots. The air smelled dry, metallic, and faintly burnt. Ahead, a shape appeared. A vehicle, abandoned. Doors wide open, engine cold. It seemed impossible, alone in the vast emptiness. I approached slowly. The sand whispered beneath my feet, each grain pressing softly against my soles. No footprints led here. Inside, a faint light flickered. Pale, strange. It danced across objects I could not name, shapes that did not belong to this world. The metal smelled faintly warm. A hint of ozone lingered in the air. I reached a hand toward the doorframe. Cold, rough, yet almost alive beneath my touch. I stepped closer. The light pulsed, rhythm soft but deliberate. Shadows curled against the seats, stretching toward the edges of the vehicle, then withdrawing like they knew I was watching. The silence pressed in. No wind, no hum, only the soft flicker of the light and my shallow breath. The desert seemed to lean closer. I knelt beside the seat. Objects glimmered faintly, edges blurred. Something almost organic, almost mechanical, but neither. I glanced around. Nothing moved outside the vehicle. No footprints, no tracks, only sand that had shifted under its own weight. A soft creak sounded. I froze. The doors had not moved. Yet the vehicle seemed aware, patient, waiting. I rose slowly. The light flickered once more, then dimmed. The shadows folded back into corners, leaving only emptiness and cold metal. I stepped back into the sand. The desert inhaled softly around me. The vehicle remained, abandoned and impossible, and I felt the weight of isolation, the subtle unease that would linger long after I left. Soft footsteps pressed into the sand as I walked away. The light no longer moved. The desert was silent, and yet I could still feel the presence of something watching, waiting from within the lost vehicle. The desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale, trembling sky. The air smelled of warm sand, dust, and a faint metallic tang. Soft grains shifted beneath my boots as I moved forward alone. Then it appeared. A faint path of light, pulsing, flickering, in rhythm with my heartbeat. It hummed softly, though the wind was still. The edges of the desert seemed to bend. Dunes warped, stretching, curling toward the flickering glow. Shadows twisted along the sand. Shapes hovered just beyond the light, faint, elusive, almost alive. I stepped closer. The path quivered beneath my gaze. Warmth brushed against my legs, but the air remained cold against my face. The desert inhaled slowly around me. Each step pressed soft impressions into the sand. Every footfall echoed faintly, swallowed by the desert. The light pulsed with my pulse, as if the path was aware of me. The hovering shapes shifted. I blinked. One lingered longer than the others, stretching upward, then folding back into shadow. The smell of dust and ozone lingered thickly. The air was tense, waiting. I leaned toward the path, drawn. And it vanished, just like that. No light, no shapes, only pale, endless sand pressed beneath my feet. I stood still. The desert was silent, patient, and yet the echo of that pulse remained in my chest, in the shadows that seemed to reach just beyond sight. I moved forward slowly. Each step uncertain, soft against the sand. The flickering path had gone. But the memory of its light stayed in the edges of vision, in the corners of the dunes, like a presence waiting, just out of reach. The desert swallowed the silence. I breathed carefully, feeling the pulse of emptiness underfoot, feeling shapes that might not exist, hovering at the periphery of thought. Alone, I walked on. The sand was cold beneath my palms, warm beneath my feet. The desert exhaled softly around me. The path was gone, and yet I could still feel it, flickering in memory, always waiting, always just beyond the edge. The desert stretched beneath a darkened sky. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of warm sand. Each footstep pressed softly into the cooling dunes. The stars were restless tonight. They flickered irregularly, pale lights pulsing in uneven patterns, almost like a rhythm, or a message meant for me alone. A low static brushed against my ears. Not wind, not movement, something different. It hummed, sharp and soft at once, vibrating through the air, through my chest. I lifted my gaze higher. Among the constellations, a figure moved. Thin, elongated, impossibly distant, yet unmistakably alive. It shifted between points of light, then blinked, and the sky was empty. The static lingered. A faint vibration pressed against my skin, tingling along my arms, through my fingertips. I could feel it in the sand beneath my boots. Subtle, insistent, waiting. I crouched, letting the desert's cold seep through my palms. The night was thick around me. Shadows pressed into the dunes, stretching and curling toward the edges of my vision. The stars flickered again, irregular, deliberate. The sky hummed quietly, a pattern I could almost understand, yet not quite. The figure returned briefly, dancing between constellations, and vanished the moment I blinked. I felt my heartbeat in rhythm with the static. Pulse and vibration intertwined, drawing me closer, though I was already here. I rose slowly, sand shifting softly beneath my feet. The desert held its breath around me. The sky seemed aware of my gaze, the stars pulsing faintly as if listening. Then the static softened. The desert exhaled quietly. The figure was gone. The stars returned to stillness, their flickers random, pale, quiet. I walked forward. The sand whispered beneath my boots. The static remained faint in memory, a lingering vibration along the edges of thought. And though the sky was empty, the sense of presence, distant, deliberate, stayed with me, stretching into the silent night. The dunes stretched into darkness, a pale wind brushing across the sand, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and cold air. Then it appeared, a pulse of light, soft, pale, moving across the ridges, not steady, rising and fading like a heartbeat. I stepped forward. The sand shifted beneath my boots, warm in some places, cool in others. The pulse moved again. I followed. There was nothing tangible to follow. No figure, no trail, only light moving across the dunes. And yet it pulled me, insistent. Faster now, like the racing of my own pulse. I felt it in my chest, vibrating through my veins, drawing my heartbeat into its rhythm. Faster. Then faster. Shadows stretched along the dunes, elongating and folding over themselves. Each pulse of light made the edges of the desert tremble. I felt alone, yet watched. The air smelled faintly of ozone and warm sand. The pulse traveled farther, up and down the rolling ridges, and I followed, my feet pressing soft paths into the untouched dunes. It slowed for a moment, then quickened again. My pulse matched it without thought. A steady drum in my chest, in my ears, in the trembling air. I paused. The light hovered ahead, then disappeared behind a crest. Silence fell. The dunes seemed to exhale, but the memory of its rhythm lingered. I could still feel it. The pulse, echoing beneath my skin, stretching into the shadows that twisted along the sand. Alone, drawn forward by something that could not be caught, something that existed only in the space between heartbeats and dunes. The pulse returned briefly, soft, faint, then gone. The desert returned to stillness, but my pulse kept racing, echoing, measured, alone. I moved again. Each step was deliberate. The sand whispered beneath my boots. The night air pressed against my skin, the edges of light and shadow folding over each other. I did not stop. The dunes held their secrets close. The pulse had vanished, but the rhythm remained, trembling beneath my skin, a heartbeat that was no longer just mine. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the dunes. The air was still, heavy with heat and dry dust, clinging to my skin, coating my lips. Then I saw it, a shimmer hovering over the sand. A structure impossibly tall, its edges wavering like water on glass. I stepped closer. Each footfall sank softly into the sand, warm beneath my toes, the grains shifting with a gentle hiss. The mirage flickered, changed shape. Walls stretched, bent, then folded into themselves. It was not a building, not anything I had known. I reached out. My hand brushed the air. The surface shimmered against my fingertips, then dissolved, leaving nothing but heat and empty sand. I paused. The wind whispered faintly, rustling the dry tufts of desert grass. Somewhere far off, a soft hum seemed to echo. The mirage returned. Closer this time. I could see inside. Fleeting figures, watching, silent. Their outlines hazy, impossible to focus on. I tried to speak. The words died in my throat. The figures shifted, vanished and returned, dancing along the edges of perception. The sand beneath me grew colder, though the air remained hot. A faint scent, like ozone and warm metal, lingered. It drew me forward against my better sense, toward the impossible structure. The closer I came, the more it pulsed with light, pale and fleeting, like a breath held too long. The figures inside mirrored the flicker, vanishing if I blinked, returning if I looked away. I reached again. This time the mirage twisted, folding inwards. The shapes dissolved. The desert stretched empty before me. My hand felt only the heat of sand, the weight of silence pressing against my ears. I stepped back. The wind carried a faint hiss, like the echo of 1,000 whispered warnings. The structure shimmered once more, then collapsed into the horizon, leaving only a soft haze and the scent of dry earth. My heartbeat echoed in my chest, matching the faint pulse that lingered in the air. I felt watched, though nothing remained. The desert breathed around me, still and endless. I walked slowly, feet pressing into warm sand, rustling softly with each step. Everywhere I looked, the dunes shimmered faintly in the dying light. The mirage had vanished, but its memory remained. A shape impossible to touch, a wonder that carried a weight of fear. I stopped. Breathed slowly. The desert swallowed the last traces of light. The figures, the walls, the shimmer gone. Only the wind and the soft, unsettling hum that seemed to linger in the folds of the sand. The desert stretched endlessly. Night had settled like a heavy cloth, cool against my skin, the last warmth of the day fading into the shadows. The wind shifted, soft at first, brushing across my face, carrying a scent of dry earth and ozone. Then the voices came, unintelligible, yet familiar. They curled around me, rising from the sand, sliding through the air like silk threads. I wanted to speak, to call back, but my own voice felt wrong. It echoed strangely, like a reflection in warped glass, slipping just out of reach. The sand moved, beneath my feet, between my toes, shifting as if it had a mind of its own. Footsteps that weren't mine traced the edges of the dunes. I spun slowly. Nothing, only the whispers and the wind brushing my ears. I breathed. Cold air filled my lungs, mixed with the sharp scent of disturbed dust. Each inhale made the whispers louder, a chorus of something half-remembered, half-imagined. I tried again. A soft word escaped my lips. The wind swallowed it. It returned to me, warped and distorted, like my voice had been folded inside the desert itself. I couldn't tell where I ended or where the voices began. The dunes rippled in time with the murmurs. Shadows stretched and wavered, elongating, folding over themselves, as if the night itself was breathing. The sky was empty, but the stars twitched. Small flickers of light, distant, mirroring the restless movement below. I felt the isolation pressing in. The desert, vast and silent, was alive with its own memory. Each whisper seemed to know me, to follow the shape of my thoughts. I wanted to step back, but the sand seemed to hold me in place. A faint hum rose under the voices. Not from the wind, not from the dunes. It was inside my chest, my pulse sinking without effort. Fingers of air brushed against my face, bringing a faint taste of metal. The world felt wrong, slightly off, as if I were watching through a veil. I crouched, letting the sand shift between my palms, warm and coarse. The whispers moved with me, sliding along the dunes, around every shadow, always just at the edge of perception. Time stretched. The wind carried nothing but these soft, murmuring voices, the desert inhaling and exhaling like a living thing. Every sound I made bounced back at me, twisted, unfamiliar. Even silence vibrated. I lifted my gaze. The horizon was empty, yet shapes flickered there. So subtle I questioned my own eyes. A curve of dune, a shadow, a pause in the wind, and then nothing. I took a slow step. The sand shifted beneath me, pale light brushing the tops of the ridges, casting long, trembling shadows. The whispers followed. Familiar, strange, insistent. I stopped, listened. The desert held its breath, and I held mine. The wind murmured, carrying my own name or something almost like it. Then a sudden silence, the kind that presses against your ears, soft but complete. The voices vanished. The shifting ceased. Only the cold desert remained, and the faint hum still clinging to my chest. I exhaled slowly. The wind sighed, and I understood. I was not alone, even in this vast emptiness, even in the quiet that seemed absolute. The desert remembered me, and I remembered it, through whispers, through sand, through the touch of a wind that felt almost alive. The desert lay quiet. Night draped over the dunes, cool air brushing my face, the faint scent of sand and stone lingering. Ahead, a hollow caught the pale moonlight. It pulsed faintly, golden and hollow, like the earth itself was breathing. Shadows stretched along its edges, long and unnatural, flickering as if alive. I stepped closer. The sand shifted beneath my boots, soft and warm from the day's memory. A hum brushed my ears, soft, persistent, like the pulse of something deep below. The hollow's glow called me. Curiosity stirred inside me, tinged with unease. I reached my hand toward the light. It was warm, a gentle heat against my skin, but nothing solid met my fingers. The glow seemed to wrap around me as if the desert itself was leaning in. I knelt at the edge. The shadows writhed and stretched. They were still, yet moved, stretching farther than light should allow, folding into shapes I could almost recognize, then dissolving again. The wind whispered softly, carrying the faint metallic scent of heat, a dry, sweet aroma like the inside of a shell. I leaned closer. The sand beneath my palms hummed faintly. The glow pulsed in response. I let my fingers brush the hollow's edge. It felt alive. Not solid, but not empty either. A vibration ran through my hand, soft and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the desert itself. I pulled back slightly. The warmth lingered, curling around my wrist, but there was nothing to grasp, nothing to hold. I swallowed hard. The night seemed to lean in. The shadows stretched again, bending the dunes into shapes I could not name. My own breath rose in clouds before me, and the hollow seemed to watch it, siphoning the moisture, letting the sand drink it slowly. I pressed my palm deeper. The light thickened, flowing around me like water made of gold. I tried to pull back. The warmth resisted, drawing me closer with silent insistence. A faint scent of smoke or maybe honey tangled in the cold air around my face. I shivered. The glow pulsed once, then twice, softly, matching my heartbeat. I could hear the sand shifting beneath the hollow, tiny grains sliding together, folding the darkness into something intimate, yet unreachable. I stood slowly, feeling the glow fade along my arms. The hollow seemed smaller now, its light dimmer, yet the memory of it lingered. A warmth pressed into my chest. I took a step back. The shadows shrank, retreating into the dunes. The wind softened, carrying only the faintest whisper of warmth, as if the desert itself exhaled. I looked once more at the hollow, empty, silent. But the golden pulse remained in memory, a reminder that not everything visible is everything there is. I turned, the night wrapping around me again. The desert hummed softly, and I moved through it alone with the warmth of something unseen still lingering at the edge of my senses. The desert stretched endlessly. Night pressed down, cool and heavy. A thin fog curled along the dunes, touching my skin with damp fingers. I saw them first at the horizon. Shapes, distant, deliberate. They moved slowly, almost as if they knew I was watching. The sand whispered beneath my boots as I stepped forward, each grain cool against my palms when I knelt to touch it. The shapes shifted with the fog. Smoke-like tendrils wrapped around them, curling and twisting in impossible patterns. They were close and far all at once, breathing, it seemed, with the desert itself. I walked toward them. My shadow stretched across the sand, flattened and warped in the pale moonlight. The wind carried a scent of stone and iron, stale and sweet, as if the earth itself had secrets it wanted to tell. Each step drew the shapes nearer, or perhaps they drew closer to me. The fog thickened, soft against my cheeks, humming faintly beneath the rustle of sand. I thought I saw eyes. Just a hint reflected in the pale light, then gone. I reached a dune ridge. The shapes should have been here. Instead, the horizon was empty. Only sand. Silence stretched endlessly, heavy and still. I felt it then. The isolation of the desert, the cold pressing against my spine. The fog clung to me, a quiet witness, wrapping my ankles and wrists in soft, damp fingers. The shapes had vanished. No footprints, no trace. Only the hum of the wind and my own breath, echoing back at me, slightly wrong, stretched and hollow. I stepped forward again. The fog shifted with me, revealing nothing, yet leaving the memory of motion, of intent, lingering in the air. I paused. The sand shifted underfoot, tiny grains falling into themselves. A soft vibration hummed through the earth like the pulse of something far below. The shapes had left, but the desert remembered them. I turned slowly, the horizon empty in all directions. The fog thinned, but the air still felt heavy, thick with the memory of presence. I breathed, the taste of sand and distant iron on my tongue, and kept walking, alone, with the shapes lingering at the edge of my mind. The desert seemed to watch me. Each step was soft, measured, as if the dunes themselves were alive. I could feel the fog curl and twist, wrapping the horizon in silence. The shapes might return, or they might not. I kept moving. The sand pressed beneath my feet, and the memory of those distant, deliberate shapes remained etched in my mind, vanishing only when I blinked. But the unease stayed, curling around my chest, soft and insistent, like a quiet, unbroken hum. The horizon was empty again, but I could feel it, just beyond the edge of sight. Watching, waiting, and I kept walking, alone, with the desert breathing softly around me. The desert lay wide and empty. Night had deepened, the air cool and dry. Sand shifted faintly beneath my boots, tiny whispers rising as each grain moved. A pulse of light tore across the sky, pale, sharp, impossible. It stretched every shadow, long and thin, as if the desert itself had reached for it. The wind carried a hum, low and insistent. It pressed against my chest, tickling my ears with vibrations like a heartbeat, or many heartbeats. The sand stung my ankles as I paused. Breath held, feeling the pulse sink deep into the earth. Something stirred behind me, a presence, heavy and close. I spun, the cold wind biting my face, but saw nothing. The shadows swayed, but offered no hint of shape. I felt it everywhere, in the rustling of the dunes, in the thin electric taste of the air. It pressed against my shoulders, yet left no footprints in the sand. The pulse brightened again. It filled the horizon, stretching light into the hollows and valleys. Every shadow moved toward it, leaning and stretching, fingers of darkness curling along the dunes. I stepped forward slowly. The desert smelled of hot stone and dust. The hum grew, a quiet vibration beneath my feet, resonating in my bones, echoing a rhythm I could not name. I stopped. The presence behind me shifted, soft but heavy, like the press of unseen hands. I wanted to run, but the pulse held me in place, its pale glow warming the edges of my vision. A shiver traced my spine. The air tasted metallic, and I felt the weight of everything around me. All the shapes I had glimpsed, all the whispers I had followed, folding into this final light. The pulse lingered, stretching into eternity, and I realized that I could not escape it. Nor did I want to. The desert had been waiting, the shadows had been waiting, and now I understood that I had been moving toward this moment all along. I breathed. The hum softened, settling into a quiet rhythm. The wind touched my cheeks like a sigh, and the light touched every shadow, flattening some, bending others, all reaching towards something beyond my sight. I felt my own pulse mimic it, rising, falling in perfect unison. The presence behind me leaned closer, but it was not violent. It was patient. It was watching. It was inevitable. The pulse began to fade. Shadows shrank and folded back into the sand. The wind whispered across the dunes, a soft, empty sound that lingered long after the light dimmed. I stood alone. The desert held its breath. The pulse had left nothing behind. No shapes, no voices, no footprints. Only silence, and the echo of a presence that I could feel but never touch. I stepped forward into the quiet. The sand shifted beneath me, soft, yielding, familiar. The night embraced me, cool against my skin, heavy with memory. I breathed. The desert stretched endlessly, and I knew I would walk it forever. Not alone, not quite, but in the company of everything I had glimpsed. All the whispers, pulses, shapes, and shadows folded into the final light. The horizon held its emptiness. The wind sighed through the dunes, and I walked onward, with the memory of the pulse etched into my bones, soft, endless, and true. The desert lay still. Fog drifted slowly, curling along the dunes. Each grain of sand felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself remembered me. The wind had fallen silent. Only the faint hum lingered, buried deep in the air, a vibration I could feel in my chest. It was no longer outside. It was inside me. The sky unfolded, pale and empty. Stars hung distant, cold, like frozen lanterns. Their light barely touched the sand beneath my feet. I breathed slowly, the chill of night brushing my cheeks, the rough edges of sand pressing against my fingers. I paused. The desert seemed to exhale around me, a slow, measured sigh stretching across the emptiness. I realized then that it had never truly let me go. Shadows curled in the hollows of dunes, but they were still, obedient to nothing. The fog thinned, leaving the air sharp and clear, and the distant hum of the dunes pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. I shivered, feeling it echo through my bones, soft and endless. I stepped forward. Each movement stirred the sand, soft whispers rising as grains slid past one another. The air tasted faintly metallic, and the scent of dry stone and dust lingered in my nostrils. The desert's memory pressed against me, heavy and intimate. I stopped again. No shape moved. No figure lingered. Only the silence, broken by the pulse I carried now. The hum was inside me, folded into my breathing, threaded through my thoughts, a quiet companion I could not shake. I closed my eyes, and the desert painted itself behind my eyelids. Endless dunes, pale light, empty sky. The stars watched, pale, distant, and patient. The night seemed to stretch farther than I could see, and I understood that I was part of it now. Not in fear, not in wonder, but in quiet reflection. I let my hands brush the sand. The grains slipped through my fingers, cold and soft, and the hum deepened, folding around me like a cloak. A soft wind stirred. It whispered through the dunes, carrying the faintest scent of heat and stone. I shivered. It felt like a conversation, but the words were beyond memory, beyond comprehension. I lifted my gaze. The fog had vanished entirely. The stars were scattered thin, pale lanterns against the black canvas of night. I felt the desert. In every heartbeat, in every breath, inside the quiet rhythm that now guided me, I walked slowly. No footsteps marked my path. The sand yielded softly beneath me, welcoming, familiar. The hum was constant, a companion stitched into my chest. I stopped once more. The horizon was empty. The sky stretched farther than I could hold. The night held its breath, and I held mine, letting the hum of the dunes settle fully inside me. The desert had not released me, nor had I asked it to. I was alone with the sky, but I carried its memory, its pulse, its soft, eternal hum. I breathed. The stars remained, pale and distant. The air tasted of cold stone and silence. I stepped forward again, sand shifting beneath me, and the desert whispered, and I listened.